Hello everyone! Welcome to Untold History, the channel where we explore the most shocking and lesser-known riots in history. Today we head to England in the 14th century to learn about the Wat Tyler Revolt of 1381, one of the most important popular uprisings of the Middle Ages, which unleashed an unprecedented crisis in the feudal system of the time. This was a peasant rebellion that broke out in 1381 in southeastern England, in response to the deep tensions brought about by the Black Death. This outbreak of bubonic plague, which ravaged Europe between 1347 and 1351, decimated England's population, reducing it by more than a third. Although it was a humanitarian tragedy of catastrophic proportions, the population decline unexpectedly shifted the balance of power between the landed aristocracy and farm workers. Before the plague, the feudal system that dominated England was based on an agrarian economy where peasants worked the lands of feudal lords in exchange for protection and the possibility of sustenance. However, in the aftermath of the plague, the drastic reduction in labor led to a shortage of agricultural workers. This change empowered peasants and gave them the opportunity to demand better working conditions and higher wages. During the years that followed, many began to flee their lords' lands to seek better opportunities, which greatly worried the nobility, who depended on peasant labor to maintain their properties and lifestyle. Faced with this crisis, the English Parliament tried to curb the growing demands of the peasants by enacting laws that imposed maximum wages and restricted the mobility of workers. One of the most famous was the Workers' Statute of 1351, which prohibited peasants from negotiating higher wages or moving without the consent of their lords. These restrictions generated deep resentment among the workers, who felt that their rights were trampled on while the nobility continued to accumulate wealth. Tensions only increased during the following decades, exacerbated by the costly military campaigns that England maintained on the European continent. In particular, England's war against France, known as the 100 Years' War, drained the kingdom's resources and forced the crown to seek new sources of revenue. To finance these war efforts, the young King Richard II, who ascended the throne at the age of 10 in 1377, resorted to an extremely unpopular measure, the imposition of new taxes. One of the most hated taxes was the poll tax, which forced each individual to pay a fixed sum regardless of their wealth or social position. This tax was particularly burdensome for the peasants and working poor, who were already facing economic difficulties. The implementation of the poll tax in 1380, combined with the growing tensions between peasants and nobles, was the trigger that led to the outbreak of the Wat Tyler Revolt. On May 30, 1381, the spark of rebellion was ignited in the region of Essex, when tax collectors arrived to impose the new poll tax. Local peasants, fed up with the abuses, resisted and attacked the tax collectors. The uprising soon spread to other parts of southeastern England, including Kent, where the figure who would give the revolt its name appeared, Wat Tyler. Wat Tyler, whose origin is still debated among historians, emerged as the charismatic leader of the peasant movement. Although little is known of his life before the revolt, it seems that he was a skilled and articulate man who knew how to channel the discontent of the masses. Under his leadership, the rebels began to organize and marched on London, intending to present their grievances directly to the king and demand an end to feudal oppression. The rebels were not alone in their fight. They were joined by peasants, artisans, and urban workers, all of them tired of the exploitation of the nobility and the clergy. In June 1381, a crowd of thousands marched on London, looting the estates of nobles on their way and freeing prisoners in direct defiance of power structures. Among their demands were the abolition of serfdom, the end of the poll tax, and the elimination of feudal privileges. Once in London, the rebels carried out a series of bold actions that shook the ruling elite. They took the Tower of London, one of the city's most important fortresses, and executed several royal officials, including Simon Sudbury, the Archbishop of Canterbury and Lord Chancellor, who had been one of the main promoters of the poll tax. This act of violence against one of England's most powerful leaders sent a clear message: peasants would no longer accept exploitation without a fight. The young King Richard II, only 14 years old at the time, was forced to take steps to quell the revolt. Faced with the magnitude of the uprising, the king agreed to meet the rebels at Mile End on June 14, 1381. During this meeting, Richard promised to fulfill some of their demands, such as the abolition of serfdom and the reduction of taxes. However, although the king made these promises, it was evident that the royal concessions were only a temporary tactic to appease the rebels and prevent a further collapse. The high point of the revolt occurred on June 15, 1381, when Wat Tyler met with the king in Smithfield, a district north of the city. The meeting began peacefully, but soon degenerated into a violent confrontation. Versions of what happened vary. Some accounts suggest that Tyler was killed by the royal guard during a dispute, while others claim that he was betrayed by the king's forces. What is clear is that, after Wat Tyler's death, the revolt lost its most influential leader and began to crumble rapidly. With Tyler's death, Richard II felt more secure and acted quickly. Although he had promised to meet the demands of the peasants, the king changed his position. He ordered the arrest of the main rebel leaders and annulled the concessions he had made at Mile End. The nobles and landowners, now reinforced by royal authority, began to retaliate against the insurgents, executing hundreds of them to restore order. Although the revolt was put down and royal concessions were revoked, this uprising left a deep and lasting impact on England. It was a clear demonstration that the peasants and workers were not prepared to endure the yoke of feudal oppression indefinitely. The violence with which they responded to social and fiscal injustices stunned the ruling class, which had never faced such a direct challenge from the masses. The legacy was not immediate, but in the long run it marked the beginning of the end of the feudal system in England. Although serfdom was not abolished immediately, the revolt accelerated the process of dissolution of this system, as landowners, fearful of further revolts, began to offer better conditions to workers to prevent future uprisings. In the popular imagination, Wat Tyler became a symbol of resistance against oppression. Although their uprising did not achieve all of its goals, their struggle was remembered as a turning point in the struggle for workers' rights. Thank you for joining us. This episode reminds us that social tensions and economic oppression can unleash mass movements with unpredictable consequences. If you liked the episode, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss the next Untold Story video. See you in the next one.